Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be all about photographing cherry blossoms in lots of creative ways and then some bluebells and wild garlic. So if you fancy taking photos of these beautiful blooms but you can't get out to a distant woodlands or you can't afford the expensive fees of these paid gardens, well, I do have a good alternative that might surprise you. I will be using several different techniques to photograph the cherry blossoms, such as double exposures, ICM, lens baby omni crystals and filters, a split diopter filter, a modified Helios lens, deliberate out of focus, the Pep Ventosa method, and capturing sunbursts. I recently visited our local cemetery as it's such a beautiful and tranquil location and very accessible. It's full of different types of cherry trees which were all in bloom but although slightly late in the season starting to go over. It is an absolutely huge cemetery, 28 acres in size, and the older sections are bursting with wildflowers too, mostly bluebells and wild garlic. It is the largest cemetery in my area, and it's also a designated wildlife site. The photos that I took here, both this year and in previous year, are just as beautiful as the ones that I can get when I visit a woodland full of bluebells or an arboretum or even a planted garden. But this place is free to visit, it's easy to get to and easy to get around as well. It was easy enough to respectfully avoid the crematorium and to give space to those people visiting loved ones' graves. Now, I naturally wanted to make a beeline for the prettiest trees, but I was intent on producing some different images. So I first opted to head towards one of the trees that was covered in a dark pink blossom. I wanted to get a type of Pep Ventosa image early on in my visit. This involves taking several photos of the same tree whilst moving around it. You can circle 360 degrees around it, but I only moved about 200 degrees to get my photos. It was kind of tricky because of the graves, so I took 8 photos but I only needed 6 or 7 in the end. I tried to keep the central trunk in the same place for each photo, and in Photoshop I layered all of these photos into one file and reduced the opacity of each one to between 15 and 25%. So that was my first image ticked off my list. It's nothing exciting, but it was good to give it a go. ICM photography was another thing on my list, and these are a few of my favourites that I took in this spot last year, mixed in with some from this visit as well. But this time I wanted to get some that were different to last year's, so I moved around the cemetery as I'd only moved around 200 foot up to now. So to get more varied images, I thought that I would try some other spots. Now last year I found it hard to keep the gravestones out of my compositions. So this year I decided that I would embrace them, and there was a spot with a couple of dark pink trees with very light gravestones in the foreground, and these gave me some nice contrast in the ICM photos, and I quite enjoyed the effect of these here. I used different shutter speeds, usually around about 0.4 seconds to around about 1 second for the majority of my ICM images, just trying out different motions to vary the results. I did find that if I could get down low and angle my camera up towards the tree, then I could eliminate some of the gravestones and just isolate the tree there. I found that if I used a longer exposure of between 1 and 2 seconds and I moved my camera sort of halfway through the exposure, I could get a kind of double exposure effect like in this image here. I also had quite a bit of fun making circular shapes and other similar shapes, just just generally having fun with my camera about, really. I love to get playful and creative with my camera and just sort of let go and go with the flow of it all and just let the magic happen with the ICM. Now, you might get some funny looks off passers-by who are trying to figure out what on earth you are doing, but this doesn't really bother me at all. If anything, it leads to some fun conversations with the people who are inquisitive enough to come and ask you about it. The next thing that I wanted to do was to play with in-camera double exposures. Now, my A7 II camera has an old app installed on it which allows me to take double exposures and choose different blend modes all in the camera. Sadly, this app is no longer available, which is quite frustrating for us Sony users. I can use an image that is already on my card as my starting first image. And this could be literally anything, any image that you've taken before that is on the card. Or you can take two brand new images and blend them together. Now, these first images were a little bit too abstract for me and I wasn't really enjoying them. But there was a nice row of cherry blossom trees nearby which I used to take a couple of double exposures of, and I think these turned out okay. These images here are some of my absolute favourite images where I used the ICM technique, but I combined it with the multiple exposure option on my camera, and I really love these ones. You can get a similar look by using just straightforward ICM but a longer exposure time, say 2 seconds or so, where you hold the camera still briefly and then you move it for the movement ICM part. I'm a big fan of Eric Malm's work with this technique. Do look up his work. He produces some wonderful, evocative, atmospheric images. As it was such a beautiful sunny day, I wanted to get some sunbursts through the blossoms as single images and as double exposures. I quite like this tree with the bench next to it and thought it might work. I really enjoyed taking these and chatting to a few passing locals who were interested in what I was doing. For this set, you can see the two single images taken to create the double exposure in camera. And I used the lighten mode in camera for all of these. I much prefer the results from these multiple exposures to the earlier dark pink tree. I think the bench adds a little something too. Then I moved along to the next tree and I loved all of the blossom on the ground with the dappled sunshine, so I thought I'd grab a couple of shots of this too, and I think these worked out nicely. While I was at the trees with the most blossoms, I thought I would take a few shooting through the blossoms, trying to focus on clusters in the distances, whilst attempting to focus and start again. Basically, I was going to try and focus on one cluster of the blossoms that was nestling in the middle of the tree with some blur in front and some blur behind. You get the picture. And the first set I did here, I did as a double exposure using this nice blurry bouquet as one layer, and this is how it looked in camera. But I also had a go at blending these two images in Photoshop, and I prefer this result. It was getting a little bit windy by this point, so I didn't really take many of these images, but I did take another couple where I used a split diopter filter. This is a thick glass filter with a strip missing in the middle, which I often use for a cinematic type of look, and it creates a blur on both sides where the glass is, and I wanted to see if I could use this to my advantage. So I took a couple of the blossom clusters and then took one of this small tree with the white blossoms. I spent a few minutes just sat on the grass with my camera on the tripod and with my modified Helios lens on. This is a vintage lens that has a piece of glass reversed, and there's plenty of tutorials on how to do this on YouTube. It can produce a unique magical bouquet, especially when shooting wide open. So I wanted to take a few photos of completely out of focus full trees, much like I did in my previous video of the Bluebell Woods, and this was to create mysterious images with a bit of a fairy tale feel to them. You can see here how the view can change just by altering the focus ring and keeping the lens wide open. It's quite a dreamy look and I really like it, and it's not to everyone's cup of tea, but I like the whimsical images and I enjoy it when photography kind of crosses over into art. But just look at this bouquet when you zoom in. It's quite fascinating, isn't it? And whilst I had my modified Helios lens out, I thought I would just take one close-up of this pretty cherry blossom. I had to add an extension tube for this though. I had my pack of Lens Baby filters in my bag as well, and briefly tried these out, choosing my crystal filter first. This worked better when I used a narrow aperture of around f/16. It didn't really excite me with this subject, and the harsh sunshine was causing too many harsh white flares, so I soon swapped over to a couple of the Lens Baby Omni colour filters on the ones with the perforated dots in them, and I altered my aperture to a wider open one to get some bokeh from these. But I still don't feel that this idea suited my subject. But I kept on swapping between the filters for a few minutes, trying both landscape and close-ups. Photography isn't always about the end result, but sometimes just about losing yourself in the whole process and experimenting, which is pretty much what I've been doing for this session. Just to round off my cherry blossom session, here are a few close-ups as well. And at the end of this video, I will share a couple of quick edits of two of these images where I add my textures. It was very easy to just choose a spot and lose myself for a few minutes at a time in photographing the beauty around me. Not just of the flowers that I'd planned to photograph, but also some wildlife and an unexpected view of a pretty chapel surrounded by bluebells. Although I did give one lady a fright when she saw me lying on the ground, and another poor gentleman thought I was experiencing terrible grief and hugging a grave. I was actually lying on the edge of a woodland path. I really must get a sign made for my scooter just to alert people and let them know that I'm just taking photos and I haven't had a stroke. When I arrived, I had planned only to take photographs of cherry blossoms, but in several different ways rather than just close-ups of the blossoms. And I took my tripods along to make it easier for myself, as I was feeling very fatigued and with very little energy, and my mat so that I could sit on the ground. But with the sunshine and uplifting sounds of the birds singing, I was slowly drawn into the woodland area as well. And I've never visited this section whilst the bluebells were in flower, and I was pleasantly surprised to see so many with lots of pink ones too, and large areas of wild garlic mixed in. This section was so peaceful, and I ended up spending a good hour or so just making my way along this path towards the exit, and I only saw 2 people in the whole time. I mostly used my Sigma 180 macro lens to photograph both the bluebells and the wild garlic, as I'd really missed it when I went to the woods recently. I also had my camera mounted on a tripod for all of these, because the 180 macro lens is just too heavy for me. Plus the tripod helps to keep things steady, and that means that I can get a more precise focus and lower the shutter speed when the wind isn't blowing. It can be quite dark under the canopy of trees, and lowering the shutter speed helps to allow me to keep the ISO lower as well, so reducing any noise. I did vary my shutter speed depending on the results that I wanted, but chose mostly between f2.8 for single bluebells, only up to f4 for the wild garlic. I kept the apertures wider as I wanted more of a dreamy look. I really wasn't bothered about getting full flowers in focus. There seemed to be an abundance of pink bluebells here, more than I've seen anywhere else, so I ended up photographing those much more than the blue ones. There was quite a difference in the density of the bluebells and the vegetation here compared to Bothell Woods. Here, the plants were absolutely packed closely together, and that made it much harder to single any out, but it was much easier photographing the wild garlic. I also had to battle against the harsh dappled sunshine hitting the flowers and the constraints of the gravestones. I did have to adhere to the paths, but it didn't stop me from getting some nice images. I did take a few deliberate out-of-focus shots of the wild garlic, as I like the bouquet that the spiky flowers create, plus a few of the scenes. These I can use to print out as backdrops to use at home, although I do find these quite pretty on their own anyway. I had such a lovely time in this cemetery. I really felt that I'd been in the middle of the countryside and not surrounded by houses and roads. All I could really hear was the bird song, and it was absolute heaven. For anyone who's actually feeling deprived of actual bluebells, I've added some on the end here that I've taken previously, where I've used various Lens Baby Omni filters to get the extra effects, such as the slight rainbow flare in those. These last three were taken in my garden recently using my modified Helios lens, so if you can't get out to a cemetery, there is still hope to produce some lovely images in your garden or an outdoor space if you have one. And if you don't have an outdoor space or a garden, then do look out for my future videos where I will share lots of creative ways to photograph flowers and more from home. I often cannot leave home for weeks or months at a time, and I've adapted to creating most of my images from home, so I do have a lot of tips to share. I knew there was a chapel at the end of this path, and I had a lovely surprise when I reached this point, as the lead up to the chapel was covered in a large area of bluebells, all in dappled sunshine, so it was really quite pretty. For these last two images, I added a texture overlay from my Twisted Bouquet texture pack, and there's a link to those in my description. In the first one, I used 2 layers and I lightly masked out a feathered area over the flower, and in the second one, I used the same blue texture in multiple layers, but changing the blend modes, which gave me several different options. And if you want to see more on how I do this, then do check out my stitch walk video where I cover it there. So that's all for that video, and my next videos will include one of my floral tales videos explaining the backstories behind my submerged floral sets. This time I will be explaining my foxglove set, which seems fitting as they're growing so fast in my garden, and I expect they'll be in flower within a couple of weeks. I also have a video coming up showing a submerged parrot tulip session, and I also have a video in planning on my approach to winning competitions. So that's all for now, and thank you very much for watching. I'd very much appreciate a like or a subscribe if you've enjoyed my videos. Thanks for watching, bye.